On February 24, 1978, a college basketball game played out in Northern California. Everything about the night was entirely routine. In the stands were 5 friends: Jock Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Weir, Gary Mathias, and Jockey Hewitt. They were all avid fans, and they were in high spirits. The very next day, they were scheduled to compete in a Special Olympics basketball tournament of their own, an event their families noted they had been eagerly preparing for all week. Following the game, the group stopped at a local convenience store, picked up a few snacks, and got back into their car for the short drive home. It was a perfectly mundane Friday evening, filled with ordinary plans for the weekend ahead. And yet, after leaving that parking lot, none of the 5 men would ever be seen together again. The next morning, when the men failed to appear for their highly anticipated tournament, their families immediately contacted the authorities. A massive search operation was launched. Searchers soon found themselves far from any suburban route. The first evidence of the men's movements eventually appeared deep within the Plumas National Forest, a steep, heavily snowed-in mountain range miles from any populated area. This map highlights the bizarre nature of their route. The direct path from the college back to their hometowns was a straightforward drive south down the highway. Instead, the men drove miles in the opposite direction, ascending a winding, unpaved logging road high into the freezing Sierra Nevada mountains. Getting disoriented on a dark road is a common mistake, but continuing to drive a standard passenger car up a heavily rutted, snow-packed mountain incline for over an hour defies basic reasoning. They had no intended destination in this forest, and no known emergency forcing them into the wilderness. The sheer geographic error is a mystery on its own. But the wrong turn is completely overshadowed by the physical findings the group left behind in those woods. Several days into the search, a team found Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego abandoned on a remote dirt road. Finding a car deserted in freezing terrain usually suggests a few standard scenarios: trapped in a snowbank, suffered a mechanical failure, or simply ran out of gas. This forensic breakdown shows a different reality. Investigators examined the vehicle and found it fully operational. The gas tank was a quarter full, the tires were intact, the engine fired up without issue, and the chassis was clear of any deep snow that would have prevented it from simply being put in reverse and driven back down the mountain. The vehicle offered a secure, heated shelter. Yet, for reasons that remain unknown, the men opened their doors and stepped out into the freezing night, unprotected in the middle of a severe winter storm. A dandeming of functional, heated shelter to enter a sub-freezing wilderness is the central paradox of the case. It is a decision that falls outside the patterns of normal survival behavior. Severe blizzards repeatedly halted the rescue efforts, burying the mountain range under massive snowdrifts. It would be months before the spring thaw allowed search teams to venture deeper into the forest. 19 miles further up the mountain from the abandoned car, searchers eventually located Ted Weir. His remains were found inside a snowed-in Forest Service trailer. The discovery suggested that Ted had successfully hiked through the snow, broken a window, and reached a dry shelter stocked with emergency provisions. But the state of the trailer contradicted that assumption. This layout shows the provisions found at the scene: heavy clothing, matches, and dozens of pristine, unopened cans of food sat entirely ignored. Evidence suggested Ted survived inside the trailer for weeks, losing nearly half his body weight before succumbing to starvation and exposure. He remained in that shelter for a significant amount of time, yet the food stayed on the shelves. He reached safety, but never utilized the supplies that would have kept him alive. Over the following weeks, the remains of 3 more men were located near the trailer and along the logging road, but the 5th man, Gary Mathias, was never found. Law enforcement combed the surrounding wilderness for years, yielding no results. No clothing, no personal effects, and no biological traces of Gary were ever recovered from the mountain. This logic tree maps out the paths of Gary's disappearance. If he hiked out and escaped the mountain, there is no record of him ever re-entering society. If he perished further into the woods, his remains have evaded nearly 50 years of intensive searching. Every possible path lacks physical proof. As the only member of the group completely unaccounted for, Gary's fate leaves a permanent gap in the timeline. Without his account or any physical traces, The sequence of events that led the group to that mountain cannot be fully reconstructed. Nearly half a century later, the Yuba County Five remains a deeply unsettling mystery. Because the evidence found on the mountain does not align with a logical narrative. A group with no reason to be in the wilderness leaves a perfectly functioning car. They walk miles through freezing snow, secure a shelter, and then starve while surrounded by food. Law enforcement and forensics teams have analyzed these findings for decades, but because the physical actions of the men refuse to follow a clear pattern of logic, the investigation has stalled. We are left only with the anomalies found in those woods. Review the timeline and leave your theory on what took place in the comments. And subscribe to Federal Files for more investigations into America's greatest unsolved mysteries.